First of all, let me say publicly that the chairman of this commission, Chairman Reynolds, and the commissioners should be congratulated and really applauded for convening this conference. With all due respect to the various conferences that take place, like the NAACP, the National Urban League, Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and various other meetings that take place, particularly during the summer, this conference today at this place on this subject may be the most important conference to take place in the 21st century. Now, you know, St. Augustine said many years ago, hope has two beautiful daughters. Their names are anger and courage. Anger at the way things are, and courage to see that they do not remain as they are. Yes, Brother Raspberry, the stream is crossable. The stream is crossable, and you are right to summon us to buy a ticket, not just wait for the lotto. 1857, Frederick Douglass said many things, but one of the things he said at a convention in upstate New York, I just want to quote that for a moment. He says, the general sentiment of mankind is that a man who will not fight for himself when he has the means of doing so is not worth being fought for by others. For a man who does not value freedom for himself will never value it for others, or put himself to any inconvenience to gain it for others. The whole history of the progress of human liberty shows that all concessions have been born of earnest struggle. If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Two philosophical precepts deeply embedded in the historical development of our nation are relevant to the issues being considered at this conference. One celebrates the power of the individual to develop his or her innate talent or human capital to pursue life's opportunities through committed individual stick-to-itiveness, which can result in personal and business success. The other, following the institution of slavery, its subsequent political and economic consequences, suggests that whether business or economic success will result from the committed personal application and development of one's individual talents or human capital by those whose ancestors were slaves may be dependent upon the fortuitous advantage of either the receipt of third-party wealth and or the conscious intervention of a variety of government-enacted programs of assistance. 47 years ago last month, Martin Luther King Jr. summoned the conscience of America to live up to the principles and precepts enshrined in our Declaration of Independence. You know what he said. He said, when the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir, a promissory note that all men, white and black, would be guaranteed their unalienable rights of liberty and pursuit of happiness, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. He reminded us that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as its citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But he said, we refuse to believe there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. And so we've come to cash this check, a check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice. We've come to collect 350 years of poker chips. He believed that liberating the Negro from chattel slavery in 1863 and then expecting him to compete overnight in the free market was a symptom of depraved absurdity, because nothing ever was done to counterweight the fact that by law, the black man had been kept illiterate and penniless. Worse, at the very moment that freed slaves were discovering that 40 acres and a mule that they'd been promised were no more real than the proverbial check in the mail, the Army was clearing Indian lands and the federal government was inviting both white citizens and European immigrants to come and grab what they could. The black man had been brought here against his will but was not offered any place in America's manifest destiny. Freedom for the Negro was freedom without bread or eat or land. You know, this past spring semester, at the request of the faculty of the Graduate School of Continuing Education at Stanford University, I designed a syllabus and reading list for a course required for students seeking a master's degree of liberal arts. The course was captioned "From Slavery to Obama." Graduate students who enrolled in that course collectively suggested that the absence of any generational transfer of wealth with compound interest from emancipated slaves to their successor families of African Americans after slavery had created a systemic economic and financial disparity between current African American communities and the majority white population. They concluded there had been no economic redress for the consequences of slavery originally contemplated by the 39th Congress when they said 40 acres and a mule. None of this was provided to the newly emancipated slaves and their successor generation of families. And as one of the speakers, I think Mr. Patterson, speaking about Lyndon Johnson, he said at a commencement speech at Howard University, "You do not take a person who for years has been hobbled by chains and liberate them, bring them up to the starting line of a race, and then say, you're free to compete with all others and still justly believe you have been completely fair. This is the next and more profound stage of the battle for civil rights. It is not enough to open the gates of opportunity," he said. President Johnson asked his audience to pay special note of what he referred to as a breakdown of the family, particularly in low-income communities. Johnson's speech had been influenced and, of course, incorporated some of the findings of what had been discussed here earlier of Senator, then Labor Secretary, Assistant Labor Secretary Patrick Moynihan, the Negro family, the case for national action. And I think it's important to take a moment to quote some of what he said, which is so relevant today. He was talking about 1965. "In this new period, the expectation of the Negro American will go beyond civil rights. Being Americans, they will now expect that in the near future, equal opportunities for them as a group will produce roughly equal results as compared with other groups. This is not going to happen, nor will it happen for generations to come unless a new and special effort is made." That's what he said. The fundamental problem in which this is most clearly the case is that of family structure. The evidence, not final but powerfully persuasive, is that the Negro family in the urban ghettos is crumbling. A middle-class group has managed to save itself, but for vast numbers of the unskilled, poorly educated city working class, the fabric of conventional social relationships has all but disintegrated. Measures that have worked in the past or would work for most groups in the present will not work here. A national effort is required that will give a unity of purpose to the many activities of the federal government. This, of course, all represented the effort of the federal government to address interrelatedness of race, gender, and poverty. What I've said before, of course, refers and describes the ideological basis for the generic remedial program, a base called affirmative action. Chairman Reynolds astutely indicated in his letter, "We have reached a critical juncture in civil rights that necessitates an open and frank discussion about lingering racial disparities. Civil rights tools of the past generations have proven ill-equipped to alleviate these disparities. The classic definition of insanity is a repetition of the same course of action in anticipation of a different result each time such action is limited. The magnitude of several of the issues and problems extant within our communities requires the fresh air of realism. Predisposed ideology must be adjusted on the basis of pragmatism. If you believe, for example, that the tenure of teachers in public schools who repeatedly turn out year after year an inferior work product of students inadequately educated in basic language, writing, and math skills is sacrosanct and not subject to removal, then this is an example of insanity, repeating the same course of action year after year but expecting a different result. Yes, traditional tools used to combat legal discrimination are not only insufficient and inadequate, but may be functionally irrelevant to address the current generation of problems substantially but not exclusively due to past generation or class discrimination. Past conventional approaches to civil rights are not responsive to the current realities of problems confronting our communities identified by Patrick Moynihan. Thus, the principal civil rights challenge of the 21st century is a commitment to the pursuit of educational excellence and a greater assumption of personal responsibility for conduct that creates adverse social and economic pathologies in our communities, which diminish the opportunity for effectively competing in the larger society.